Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. My name is Jay Shabat and I'm joined today by Meghna Maharishi. In part one of our podcast today, we'll discuss some takeaways from Q4 earnings season, specifically for U.S. carriers. And then in part two, we'll take a closer look at Frontier Airlines. Meghna, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We have all of our numbers in for U.S. Airlines. Well, I shouldn't say all. We've got a few sort of semi-stragglers, I say, because we have Breeze Airways that is not public yet, so we don't have their numbers. We'll get a little bit of a sense of how they did when the DOT publishes financial results for the whole industry. We don't have that yet. We don't have all of Spirit for Q4 yet, but we have enough to know enough. And other than that, though, we're pretty much all the big names are in. And I think what we'll do is I'm going to read off a ranking of each carrier's operating margin, starting with the best, going to the worst for Q4. And then I'll hand it over to you, Meghna, and you can read the numbers for the full year results, which we have as well. So without further ado, for the fourth quarter of 2025, the best performing U.S. airline, I know Gordon always says we don't have a budget for a drum roll, so we'll leave that out, but SkyWest is actually with a 13% margin. Obviously, you got to put a little asterisk next to them because they're a regional carrier, a very different business model. But just so everybody is aware, that is an airline that's doing very well. So if you want, we can put them aside. Other than SkyWest, Delta comes in at number one for Q4 at 10%. United 9%, Sun Country 7%, Southwest 5%, Frontier 5% with a little asterisk there too. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. And Alaska also had 5%. American only 3%. And there was one major U.S. airline that lost money in the fourth quarter, and that was JetBlue with a negative 4%. So, Meghna, do you want to read the same numbers for the full year?
Yeah, sure. So similar to the fourth quarter, the most profitable carrier for 2025 was also SkyWest with the operating margin at 15.2%. And then that is followed by Delta with the operating margin of 10%. Then you have Sun Country at 9.7%, United at 8.4%, Alaska at around 5%, American at 3%, Southwest a little under 2%, and then at the bottom of the pack, you have JetBlue at a negative 3.7% operating margin, and then Frontier at a negative 4% operating margin.
Great, yeah. And I will say a few final things here about the earnings for both Q4 and 2025 in totality. So one is that we do have Spirit numbers for not December yet, but we do have October, November. And I just tell you for those 2 months, the operating margin was negative 33%. So we know that this is an airline in very serious stress. It's in bankruptcy, second bankruptcy, trying to get out. So we can add that to our collection of numbers there as well. The other thing I mentioned before that we need to put a little bit of an asterisk near Frontier, they did have some undisclosed aircraft sale leaseback gains. So basically when they sold their aircraft, they kind of booked a profit and they kind of subtracted that from their costs, and that kind of inflated their margins a little bit. So Frontier is doing a little bit worse than we disclosed there as far as the numbers that they gave. We don't know again exactly how much worse, but keep that in mind. And I guess the only other thing that I will say regarding the earnings that are in is that, of course, Allegiant plans to merge with Sun Country. And so if you put those two together, I think I did the calculations. Yes, I did. So if you put those two together for Q4, they would have had an 11% operating margin. So both of those airlines are doing well. And together they, would be a strong airline. So, and I think any other comments to add about that, Meghna, about any of the Q4 or full year operating margin rankings?
Yeah, I think they're not really surprising, but I think it's just worth noting that a lot of the same themes are sort of continuing on to 2026 with premium being still very big and very profitable and coupled with international travel. So that still seems to be propping up United and Delta at least.
Yeah. Oh, and I should say this too, kind of interesting to point out here. There was only, of all those airlines that I read, the big ones anyway, I'm not sure, I don't have Sun Country's number here off the top of my head, but or off on the spreadsheet I'm looking at. But of most of those airlines that I mentioned, only one of them had a better margin in 2025 than in 2024, and that was Southwest. So Southwest is looking for some reasons to be encouraged, maybe some reasons why to feel that maybe their turnaround is kind of moving in the right direction. They could sort of take that to heart. Everyone else, I mean, even Delta last year had a 10.6% operating margin. This year is only 10.0. So Southwest stood alone in that distinction. So give them credit for that. All right, let's move over to American, because I know that's an airline that's been in the news a lot, and it's an airline that I know have been following very closely, and you've been writing a lot of interesting stories on them. Can you give us a sense of what's the latest at American?
Yeah, it seems like after American reported their fourth quarter results, there's been a bit of inner turmoil coming out over some of the leadership at the carrier. Two things that happened that I think are fairly unprecedented is that the flight attendants union did do a vote of no confidence in CEO Robert Isom. And then the pilots union has been requesting a meeting with the board, and neither of these unions are currently in any contract negotiations. So that is pretty surprising that they're out here being this vocal about their opposition to the
They're,
current leader.
they're making more money than everybody else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there just seems to be a lot of like frustration. I have been also told that it's like all of Americans unions, not just the flight attendants and the pilots union. It's also like the mechanics as well. For example, I think the pilots and the flight attendants are just the largest unions that have been the most vocal about this. But generally, they've been pretty unhappy for a while, and I think it's just getting worse as Americans' profits just seem to shrink compared to its biggest competitors, United and Delta. And I think even that coupled with Southwest sort of turning around and even having a pretty strong fourth quarter, there's quite a bit of discontent among some of the workers at American.
Yeah, just to clarify one thing that I just said about American earning more than their peers, that's maybe not true for everyone. Specifically, when American is comparing their labor contracts to United specifically, American has new agreements in place, whereas United is kind of still negotiating some of those early post-COVID contracts. So when I say they're making less than their peers, it's United specifically, and American will point that out all the time. I mean, if you listen to Robert Isom, the CEO, speak on their earnings calls, they will always, make sure everybody is aware that they're paying higher contractual rates in United for a lot of their big work groups. However, when you're talking about airline pay, you're not just talking about wages, right? Or, contractual pay, right? You're also talking about profit sharing. And so what I think Americans unions are upset about, part of what they're upset about is that, yeah, fine, you gave us raises, but we're not getting any meaningful profit sharing checks, or at least as meaningful as some of our peers. So that's, I think, where we stand with that. Anything else that the unions are upset about, or is it pretty much focused on the profit sharing?
Yeah, I just want to note on the profit sharing part, I think American's full year profit was 111 million for 2025. And Robert Isom did tell staff internally that the profit sharing would be meager. He used that word himself. I think when you compare that to what Delta employees are getting, Delta said that pretty much their profit sharing is amounting to a month's work, a month's worth of pay. I think that's like pretty frustrating just for a lot of those pilots and flight attendants. But beyond just the profits, I think like another big issue is just some of the operational issues at American. American is not exactly a star operations wise. And I think some of those issues really came to a head during that winter storm that we had in January that swept a big part of the US, and especially like the East Coast. I think American just took a longer time to bounce back compared to like United and Delta and Southwest. They said that they were struggling with like DFW, with the airport just being covered in like ice and snow. But I think they also just had other operational issues. They had issues with scheduling. They had crews that were stranded for days and they were sleeping on airport floors. So I think that also has really added to a lot of the frustrations that the pilots and the flight attendants feel with American's leadership right now.
Yeah, great point. And just because I have that spreadsheet in front of me, for the full year of 2025, if you even take out special accounting items, American's full year profit was 237 million. Magni, you mentioned that 111 million, which is absolutely correct. I took out special items there, 237, whereas Delta 3.8 billion, and then United 3.5 billion. So you could see that giant gap there. Let's just talk about labor relations aside at American. Anything, why I just read you those numbers, this giant disparity. Can you give me like 2 or 3 reasons why is American falling so short of what its peers are earning right now? And if you want, you can, I'll lead you right in. If you want to start with Chicago, you can.
Yeah, that's one of them. I think it seems as if like post COVID, they lost a lot of market share in some pretty major hubs. I think Chicago being one of them, and then even just New York too. I mean, they've been trying to move more into Philadelphia, but Philadelphia is like not New York, so I think
Not
it's
even close. Yeah,
hard
much smaller.
to be competitive with Delta and United in that region. That's definitely a part of it. They retired a lot of like their wide body aircraft as well during the pandemic, which I think has really come back to bite them when it comes to this whole international expansion, which is what is profitable right now. And I mean, they're a lot more domestic oriented. I think also their peers, United and Delta, had really been making these like premium international bets like a decade before. And like now it's really starting to pay off. Whereas I think American was trying to just be more domestic focused. They wanted to focus more on like growing and like the Sun Belt because a lot of those cities are the fastest growing in the United States. So I think it's just a series of like just making the wrong bets, which is why their profits are very sluggish compared to
Yeah.
their peers.
Good summary there. They certainly made a bad bet with their distribution strategy. They probably made a bad bet with their wide body decision to retire a lot of their wide bodies during COVID. So yeah, I think there are some real tangible reasons why American finds itself in this position. Are you optimist, pessimist? What do you think? Is a turnaround coming?
I'm not sure. I mean, they're trying to become more premium, and I think you can even hear it in the earnings calls when like ISOM describes American as a premium airline. I'm not sure for a lot of people who fly American if they would necessarily agree with that characterization, at least with American in its current state. I do think like their operations do seem to be an issue, like especially their on-time performance compared to United and Delta. I definitely lag in that. And I think that's also a big part of maybe being a premium airline. But I know they are bringing back like champagne to business class, and like they have like these partnerships for like better coffee. And they've also been adding in these business class suites to their A321 XLRs. I think those have been a little polarizing from what I've heard. But I think they are trying. It's just like unclear like how like this will pay off or if it will pay off immediately. And then I also think Chicago is now like becoming another issue with the way that United is really gaining a lot of ground in that market, and how American is also trying to ramp up capacity to match up with United, but it's unclear if they can really actually do that.
Yeah, that's. I think we spoke last week, Gordon and I, about how Chicago O'Hare is now one of the fastest growing airports in the world in terms of year-over-year capacity, and it's not really a fast growing, population wise. Excuse me, it's not very fast growing city or metro area. So that's pretty going to be pretty tough to sustain. We'll see if both of those airlines are able to, keep going there, or if, one at some point yells uncle. And you'd have to believe that American, if anyone pulls capacity, I mean, if anyone retreats, it would be American, because they've always been sort of the second player there in terms of size, in terms of, resonance with the corporate community, business schedules, et cetera. But they, at the same time, they're investing money in the market, and they say they're winning a lot of new advantage loyalty program members in the market. So they seem to be, all in. So that we'll see how it transpires.
Yeah, I will say also worth noting with United, I think since the pandemic, United has made very big strides in reaching out to those corporate travelers in Chicago and really marketing towards them. And I think that has also just worked out for like United as well, which is, I think, partly explains like some of its like dominance at the airport.
Yeah. The other thing is I know we can go on forever about any individual airline here, especially one as big and important as American. I did just remember also that, Dallas and Charlotte are probably their two most profitable hubs. I think I need to use the word probably there. And those airports are somewhat growth constrained right now as well. So American finds themselves having to allocate growth to other markets other than their, strongest markets. That'll change over time. Both Dallas, Fort Worth, and Charlotte will have more capacity in the future. So that should help them when some of that capacity comes online, particularly a new terminal at DFW Airport. So, all right, anything else on American or US airlines in general before we turn to Frontier?
I think that's all. I think it's all just a wait and watch game to see if there is any leadership shakeup at all.
Yeah, that's kind of the unspoken. That's I think everybody's asking that question as well. Yeah, can Mr. Isom keep his job considering all the pressure he's under? And yeah, like you said, wait and see. All right, so we'll move over to part two. All right, so we're going to talk about Frontier Airlines now. We mentioned in part one that Frontier lost money in 2025. We said they had a negative 4% operating margin. That was a $137 million net loss. And we said that that was probably understated a little bit. The losses are probably even a little bit worse because they're padding it somewhat with some sort of sale leaseback gains. They undisclosed about how significant that is. But we do know that Frontier, I think, pretty clear that they had a very troubled year. And so they now are embarking on a turnaround plan under a new CEO. And I'll give you I'll give you sort of the highlights. It's basically a 4-point plan. And the 4 points, basically, I'll do it in 4 words. It's a little bit more economizing on the words than they would put it. But it's basically a fleet restructuring, a cost restructuring. They're working on reliability and they're working on loyalty. So it's those 4 things: fleet, cost, reliability, and loyalty. And they, a few, subtopics there that we can get into, but they hope that if they address those 4 issues, they will be back to being the consistently profitable airline that they were pre-COVID. You listened to the call, right, Meghna?
Yes, I did.
Any takeaways or anything that struck you? Or?
I think the most interesting thing to me was based off of the plan that the CEO James Dempsey laid out, is that it seems like they want to go more into that high utilization aspect when that doesn't seem like it has been profitable, at least for this past few years, for like the Spirits and the Frontiers. Whereas the carriers that are like the opposite of that, like an Allegiant or Sun Country, have definitely have had a better time. So I thought that was interesting that they're making that bet and that they want to increase the utilization times of their fleet like currently.
Yep. And that struck me as well as a very key tenet of their turnaround program. Their utilization, I believe this was last quarter. I have the number here in front of me, down 11%. I think that was a Q4 number. So that means their aircraft are spending more time on the ground, essentially not making money. And, one of the old maxims from Southwest Airline Economics 101 is that you want to keep your planes in the air so that they are generating revenue and also achieving economies of scale. But as you alluded to, there have been some new models like the Allegiant model, and Spirit and Frontier were kind of pushing in that direction too, where you fly the airplanes less. You fly them only when demand is strong. And the penalty you take on the economies of scale side, you theoretically make up on the revenue side, the unit revenue side. And that's worked brilliantly for Allegiant over the years, but it hasn't obviously worked well for Spirit and Frontier more recently. And that some of that has to do with aircraft ownership costs and things like that. We don't have to get into all the details, But Frontier is kind of saying, look, all right, we need to get these planes flying more often. We need to get our unit costs down by maximizing the utilization of the aircraft. Now, the bad news is that implies more flying on Tuesday afternoon to which city am I going to insult, Meghna? Podunk, Iowa. Is that even a real place? Wednesday, just these very off peak, Saturday night to wherever. So that is the bad thing. You do take a unit revenue penalty, but Frontier is betting that they're going to play the cost game now, and that's what they kind of used to do. That was kind of the old model. So that we'll see if they're able to make that work. Shifting over to the revenue side, I mean, what they say is one reason why they think they can get away with flying more on these Tuesdays and Wednesday off-peak periods is that they do say the revenue environment in the domestic U.S. has improved considerably just in the past couple of weeks, months. They talk about how their unit revenues, just looking at advanced bookings, are coming in at with a healthy increase. So if that holds, then maybe they'll deliver exactly what they're promising. They say particularly in the western part of the U.S., they're seeing really nice unit revenue gains, and that's primarily because Spirit is pulling the most capacity from these western markets. You think of Las Vegas, that's the one that immediately comes to mind, but I'm sure also some California markets as well. And I'm sure there's some others. So yeah, well, that's the thinking anyway. So yeah, anything else from Frontier? I wrote kind of a couple other notes here. Anything new on Spirit? Are they going to Frontier Spirit merger? Are we going to see that after all?
Doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I mean, at least during the call, Frontier didn't really want to talk about that. I feel like they kind of gave like a no comment.
Kind of brushed it off.
Yeah. And there are like some reports that they just could not get a deal done. Just neither side has confirmed that. I think also with like Spirit, seems like a general theme from this earnings season is that all the airlines are expecting to see some sort of domestic boost because Spirit has been pulling so much capacity. I feel like even like Delta and United have like commented on that as well, that they expect domestic to improve over the year just because of Spirit. And I think even Frontier noted Atlanta was another market that they were potentially seeing some upside just because of Spirit. And I think also Southwest pulling back from there as well.
Yeah. And then the economy, I think if you compare the US economy now compared to where it was this time last year, I'd say there's a lot less uncertainty. If you recall, during Liberation Day, was that in maybe April? It might have been
like March.
Yeah. Okay. March. So here we are in February. And I think even in the lead up to that, there was a lot of concerns about tariffs. And then that concern kind of persisted for a couple of months, I would say, then maybe eased off a little bit. I mean, to be perfectly clear, there's still a lot of tariff uncertainty. There's still a lot of general uncertainty in the economy, but there's also a ton of business investment, particularly all this, AI data center and associated, energy infrastructure investment that does drive some airline traffic, probably quite a bit. I mean, if you think about all the, consultants that are involved in that, the bankers and the accountants and, so there's, I think airlines are definitely seeing a benefit for some of that business investment. And then of course, we know that whole K-shaped theory about how people with, rising stock market portfolios and, home prices are up and the, people that just upper income Americans, let's call it, we know that they're traveling a lot and they're traveling in premium a lot. So, is Frontier able to capture some of that premium demand? They're trying. That's an open question. That's definitely, there are some helpful trends on the economy side for sure. I guess I'll just close with, because I have them in my notes here. Do you know, I'm going to ask you, I'm sorry to put you on the spot again, Meghna. Gordon hates when I do this, but all right, what is Frontier's busiest airport? And I'm looking for the upcoming quarter. It's a surprise, so you won't be penalized if you don't get it on the first try. But any idea?
Their busiest airport in the
busiest airport.
either?
And
one of like their, not like hubs, but ones where they're like the inn, or it's like a warm place.
Yeah, so you're kind of guessing what you should be guessing. Like their chief hub would be Denver. That's their hometown.
Yeah, so it's
And that forever has been their busiest airport. And you talk about as well the sunshine markets. I think you mentioned that Orlando. That's number 3, I think. So you're kind of right there. But I wouldn't expect anybody to get this, including myself, if I hadn't seen. But their busiest market is going to be Atlanta this quarter.
Oh, really?
Next quarter, which is crazy. Yeah, they're actually. I think I wrote in Airline Weekly that they're going after Delta's table scraps, and maybe it's a pretty big market. It's Atlanta as a local market is not super huge, but they think they can make that go in part because Southwest has pulled a lot of capacity, and going back to the old case of Spirit, they're pulling a lot of capacity from Atlanta as well. So that's very interesting too. Atlanta. I bet you that surprised you, didn't it?
Yeah, because I'm not gonna lie, when Frontier first said they were gonna go more into Atlanta, I think like a couple years ago, I was a little confused because I was like, oh, how are they gonna make it work in Atlanta? But I guess it is working.
Yeah, it's like going up against the Death Star.
Yeah, exactly.
The mighty Delta. And yeah, I want to just say one more thing because I think it's a very interesting question about Frontier, and then we'll call it a podcast. I do start to question about whether these giant A320neos are the right aircraft for carriers like Frontier and even Spirit or some. I mean, Wizz Air is another, Wizz Air is Frontier's cousin. Both are part of the same ownership group. These are they're essentially wide bodies in terms of capacity. I mean, 240 seats. Are they too big for a carrier like Frontier? That's an open question. Okay, well, thank you, Meghna. That was interesting discussion, and we will follow it closely as things progress.
Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skiff channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.